Can I welcome you to this first webinar meeting of the Conservative Group for Europe. There are a substantial number of you present here this evening, and we hope that this is going to be an interesting and entertaining evening for you with a very good speaker. Now, the ground rules are these. Because of the numbers of you who are going to be present, we are David.
Hello, hello, hello. Dominic.
Good evening and welcome and thank you for joining us. I was just in the middle of laying down the ground rules for this evening's webinar and you have arrived at the opportune moment. So I will just conclude my introductory remarks, then I will introduce you. And when I've introduced you, I'm then going to suggest that you might like to speak for about 15 minutes about how you see the current state of politics and the UK within Europe. And then we have some pre-notified questions which I am going to bowl at you. And I suspect that will take us through to the hour. Now, so far as participation is concerned, I was just explaining to all those who have joined us, and I think we are about 100 people have notified their intention of coming. I'm not quite sure how many are here at the moment, but it's a substantial number. Because of the size of the audience, although we have the pre-arranged questions, it will be probably impossible to go beyond that. If people do want to ask something, it is possible for them to communicate using the chat line. And if by any chance I think there's something which I can include in a question to you, David, later on, I will do that. Otherwise, I suspect it will be the pre-arranged questions. And seeing the amount there is to talk about, I strongly suspect that that will take us through to 7:30. So as I say, the format is, I'm going to introduce you formally in just a moment, ask you to speak for 15 minutes, then we will do the Q&A. Should for any reason I be deleted so that the internet collapses, which has been happening in the UK actually, because of, I suspect, overload due to COVID, Edward Bickham, who is also present, will take over, but I hope that isn't necessary. So with those introductory remarks, I am then going to introduce David, who I notice has just disappeared, but I think is about to reappear, and he has reappeared, which I'm grateful. We are very lucky to have David McAllister with us here this evening. As many of you will know, born in Berlin with a British father, a dual national, and quite frankly, you wouldn't know if you met him in the United Kingdom that he wasn't a Brit. You would certainly realize if you met him in Germany that he was German, because he is completely and totally integrated. He, having been brought up in Germany, became a member of the Cuxhaven Council in 1996 and started out with CDU politics, which, if I understand correctly, was partly a reflection of his father's British conservatism. In due course, he became the leader of the CDU in the Lower Saxony Parliament. In 2010, he was designated as the Minister-President of Lower Saxony. He held that post until the elections in 2013, and in 2014, he became a member of the European Parliament, where he became a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, a rapporteur on Serbia, in due course, the Vice Chair of the International Democratic Union, and in 2015, the Vice President of the EPP, and Chairman of the Committee of Foreign Affairs in 2017. Co-chair of the Democracy Support and Election Group, and you will be interested to know, post the Brexit referendum, recommended setting up a joint parliamentary assembly between the European Union and the United Kingdom. I have to say, speaking personally, that one of my experiences of Brexit, which hasn't been a particularly pleasant one in many respects, it was the realization quite early on that the Germans were in fact our best friends in Europe. They certainly showed more understanding about Britain's position, and I think a greater willingness to try to moderate the process with an understanding of our own views than any single other country. And in doing that, David played, I know, a prominent part, for which we should all be grateful. But we now have to look ahead. This group, David, the Conservative Group for Europe, is not about to wind up. On the contrary, it thinks it has rather a bright future, albeit in a slightly different form from that which we've had previously. Without any more ado, I would like to thank you very much for giving up your time and joining us. And I would like to invite you to address the webinar audience. Thank you. Dave.
Well, thank you, Dominic, for your kind words, and a warm welcome here from Brussels to all Conservative friends participating in this webinar. I'm actually in the European Parliament. We are not back to normal yet, but we are starting to lift some of the measures in member states, and you can already notice that, for instance, the Germans, the Dutch, the Luxembourgers are returning now to Brussels, even though life has changed here in the European Parliament. Let me in the beginning also say that the European Parliament has changed without our British colleagues. I must say that the colleagues from the Conservatives, but also in this case Labour, Lib Dems, were very highly respected. There were representatives of another political party. We don't miss them so much, but I must say that we did have in the committees very respected British colleagues, and it's really such a pity that they're no longer with us. Now, I have been asked to talk briefly about the current state of play in EU-UK negotiations. I'm happy to do so. If you might hear some words from me not being that optimistic, please don't shoot me as the messenger who is trying to bring across, some would say bad news, some might see just realistic news, because we are now entering a crucial phase in this first larger round of negotiations. But before that, I'll start with what role is actually the European Parliament playing in this matter. As Dominic mentioned, we have set up a so-called UK Coordination Group in the European Parliament. It is our job to follow the ongoing negotiations closely. We're composed of 12 members of all political groups, including the chairs of the most relevant committees dealing with the future UK relations, and I have the honour to chair this group. We are more or less replacing the former Brexit steering group, which was chaired by Guy Verhofstadt. And for good reasons, we now call it UK Coordination Group. For the one reason, Brexit is done. And on the other hand, I prefer to coordinate a parliament. And I don't like to steer my colleagues. Guy Verhofstadt, I think, was much more enthusiastic about steering a process. Now, this coordination group meets, I would say, roughly once a week, before and after every negotiating round. We are debriefed or briefed by Michel Barnier and other members of his team. We've also had Maroš Šefčovič, as guest in our coordination group. He is, of course, the co-chair, together with Michael Gove, of the EU-UK Joint Committee. The European Parliament adopted a resolution at the beginning of the negotiating process in February. We are planning to adopt another detailed resolution in June at a plenary session round about the middle of the month. So we will have a direct impact on the high-level conference, which will presumably take place the end of June, just before the decisive European Council. So in the moment, we're preparing our second resolution, and we've asked for input from more or less all committees. Now, a word on the demanding context of these negotiations. I was just invited to also address these issues in our EPP parliamentary group. What we have to do in the next 8 months is to advance on 3 work streams. First, to ensure the proper implementation of the withdrawal agreement. Second, to get prepared for the negative economic consequences that the end of the transition period will entail. And third, to negotiate a future partnership between the EU and the UK. Now, on the first task, I'll be very brief to ensure the proper implementation of the withdrawal agreement. Here we're talking about citizens' rights on the one hand, 4.5 million people involved, more than 3 million EU citizens in the UK and more than 1 million citizens in the UK citizens of the EU 27. And on the other hand, it's about the implementation of what has been agreed on the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland border system and the relations. Why is this so important for the future relations? Because in Brussels, confidence that the UK is implementing what has been mutually agreed is considered as being an indicator how credible the UK is now in these ongoing negotiations, and on the other hand, by some is described as a precondition for building a future partnership. The second task is to prepare ourselves on both sides for the changes that will take place in any event, whether we have an agreement or not. And as I understand, the UK government is determined to leave the single market and the customs union at the end of this year. We are talking about the 1st of January. Let's be clear, the 1st of January 2021 will not be like the 1st of February 2020, because not much has really changed in reality yet. But this 1st of January 2021 will have an impact on you in the UK, but also in the EU 27. We have to prepare our citizens and our businesses for the definitive changes and the underlying difficulties. And my impression is that this is underestimated by both sides. On the 1st of January, customs formalities will be applied on all our imports and exports with the UK. On that day, financial institutions established in the UK will automatically lose the benefit of the financial passport, and an authorization or certification issued in the UK will no longer enable a product to be placed on the European market, whether it be a vehicle, industrial good, or even a medical device. So we really have to prepare our businesses and our citizens what might come. And now the third task is, of course, and the main task is to rebuild the partnership with the UK. I thought it was positive at the beginning of negotiations that both sides declared they want to conduct these negotiations in the spirit of mutual respect and goodwill. And it was a positive start in February. However, we are under enormous time constraints. We would have been under enormous time pressure without the pandemic, but this has added the pressure on our timetable. To put it straight, under normal circumstances, we would have concluded the fourth round of negotiations last week. Instead, we are now preparing for the third round that will once again take place via video conferences. Now, the second round of negotiations, Michel Barnier told us, was composed of 40 video conferences. Now, you can do a lot with modern technology, but I regret to state that it's just not the same thing in terms of the quality of discussions and negotiations. We need progress on all areas that both sides mutually agreed on in the political declaration. This goal was, to put it in diplomatic terms, only very partially achieved during the second round. Now, I don't want to enter the discussion which you are having in the UK, if it's wise to extend the transition period or not. I think it's fair to say that the European Union would be willing to extend this period, but we know exactly it takes two to tango, and that the UK government is obviously still determined to keep the 31st of December. A final remark: where are the four major fields of divergences? The first one is the level playing field. No surprise. We, as a EU, are of the opinion we're offering the UK good access, unprecedented access, the best possible cooperation with the single market. with 450 million consumers, a market that is on the UK's doorstep. However, this partnership would be broad and comprehensive, encompassing trade in goods and services, including transport, fisheries, and energy. But we also want to be ambitious in guaranteeing high social and environmental standards. Unfortunately, the positions are apparently very far apart. And let me also add that the European Parliament, and especially the groups left to the EPP, are paying huge attention to all issues around this level playing field. The second field where we're at odds is the overall governance of our future partnership. We as an EU have proposed a single framework for the UK and the EU to manage jointly and efficiently all areas of our future partnership. In contrast, the UK continues to insist on a number of separate agreements, each with respective separate governance arrangements. In our opinion, this would lead to inefficiencies and in the end to a lack of transparency in the implication and enforcement of the partnership. The third point of divergence is the future police and judicial cooperation in criminal matters. I believe that both sides want a close cooperation here, but we face some problems. The UK refuses to provide firm guarantees rather than, as we would argue, vague principles on fundamental rights and individual freedoms. The British side insists on lowering current standards and deviating from agreed mechanisms of data protection. This would create serious limitations for our future security partnership because we understand that the UK will be a third country and it will no longer be treated as a member state. However, what we're offering is a cooperation which is unprecedented for a non-Schengen third country that is now rejecting the free movement of people, both due to the number of fields covered and the closeness of the cooperation proposed. And the fourth point, fisheries. And here I must say we have made more or less no progress at all. Despite the political declaration stating that we should make our best endeavors to reach an agreement by July, there hasn't been any progress made yet. We understand the UK doesn't want the fisheries agreement to be part of our economic agreement. The UK is in favor of annual negotiations, whereas the member states, especially France, the Netherlands, Denmark, are saying that they won't agree to any future economic partnership that doesn't include a balanced, sustainable, and long-term solution on fisheries, whatever that means. Once again, an agreement is supposed to be reached by July, so we're really starting to run out of time. Dominic, a final remark and then I'll close. I believe June will be the decisive month. The high-level conference will take stock of the progress made in the negotiations. Before that, we have 2 more rounds of negotiations. I would say only 2, one beginning in the week of the 11th of May and one in the week of the 1st of June. We really need to use these 2 rounds now to make real tangible progress across all areas, including all those I have just raised. Finally, it's a great pleasure to talk to British Conservatives who are interested in Europe. And I can tell you that I'm still so emotional about this question that your great country has left the European Union because our European Union is different without you and also this European Parliament. But as much as I regret that your country has left the EU, it's my fundamental belief that we have to make the best out of this now, and we need a strong cooperation on both sides to be able to tackle the challenges ahead of us. Michel Barnier was rather skeptical after briefing us at the last UK Coordination Group. And I do hope now that we use the time in May and June to make real progress, and then hopefully we can get it done in the second half of this year. And once again, we are ready to extend the transition period, but I have been told by my British friends, the more that we request this, the more difficult it is for 10 Downing Street to actually ask for this. So we're going to shut up on this issue and keep it in the hands of the Conservative Party, the House of Commons, and of course the British government. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. That was a wonderful tour d'horizon for us and very helpful. We have quite a few questions, but as usual, I'm going to exercise the chairman's prerogative to start. Could I just pick up on security, the judiciary and police cooperation, and just get your thoughts about where the problems lie? There clearly are problems, and I think many of us had rather hoped that it was one area that, because it didn't concern economic competition, would be capable of being resolved. But we don't seem to be making progress. Is the lack of progress because of an unwillingness by the UK government to have the European Court of Justice ultimately as an arbiter of issues, or is it in fact because of a strange backsliding on the European Convention on Human Rights, which seems to have crept in, or we've picked up at this end, seems to have crept into the discourse, so leading the EU with the impression that the UK wants to move outside the ECHR's framework? I don't know what you can tell us about this, but I think it's quite an important issue from the domestic end, and it's quite unclear what seems to be going wrong.
Okay, a tricky question. How can I put it? If you look at the mandate of the Council, and also if you look at the parliamentary resolution from February, the EU has been very clear that the basis for our cooperation has to be that we refer to common values such as democracy, the rule of law, human rights, or the fight against climate change as an essential principle. Now, this is nothing new. These values are standard in all our international agreements, but we really need a clear commitment from the UK side that our British partners are taking this seriously. Now, your question is that our agreement, from our point of view in Brussels, must foresee the UK's coherent adherence to the European Convention on Human Rights, which ought to be given effect in domestic law so that individuals can rely on it. This is particularly important in the field of law enforcement and internal security. And those of you who have followed the debates in the European Parliament, I don't know how we're going to survive a debate with our liberals and socialists, Greens and communist colleagues in the European Parliament if we don't have a clear commitment to the European Convention on Human Rights. And finally, the partnership cannot deliver on the high level of ambition expressed in the political declaration without the UK recognizing the role of the European Court of Justice when we use concepts of EU law. And one example is, of course, the exchange of personal data. And this point, Dominic, relates to the European Court of Justice case law, that the EU cannot conclude an international agreement that refers to EU law concepts or rules, for example, data protection, but which does not preserve the ECJ's role when it comes to disputes on interpretation. I know that this is difficult for many in London, and I understand all the criticism of the European Court of Justice. But in the moment, the rules are very clear. And so this is really also a real point of divergence. I wonder how we're going to square this circle.
Thank you very much. That's extremely clear. I suspect the latter one may be harder to square. The one on the ECHR I find inexplicable, because I cannot believe, despite the huffing and puffing, that the government intends to, in spite of what's occasionally been put in Conservative manifestos, to jeopardise our membership of the Council of Europe. But that's been very helpful, to me anyway, in trying to understand the way in which the UK government seems to approach it. And I certainly find, as I say, the former bit inexplicable. The latter one is probably quite difficult for the UK because of our concern about European Court of Justice jurisdiction, but I understand exactly where the EU is on that. Can I then turn, David, to some of the questions which I'm going to read out and who they come from? Some of these names will be very well known to you. So the first one is from John Boyce. Has the experience of the Greek budgetary crisis and Germany's and other northern member states' reluctance to bail out without stringent conditions affected the current and future attitudes towards the EU South's desire for solidarity during and post-corona, and the EU North's reluctance to go along with it?
Wow, okay, this is now domestic German politics. Well, you can imagine that this is a huge issue in Germany. I'll put it this way. We are all sitting in the same boat throughout the whole of Europe, especially within the European Union, and we can only get out of this crisis together. And the role of the single market will increase. And Germany, knock on wood, in the moment, has managed the crisis quite well. I'm a bit concerned that we're lifting many of our tough measures at a very early stage, and we can only hope and pray that the crisis, the coronavirus won't come back. But Germany in the moment is doing well and will probably come out of the crisis earlier and better than other EU member states. Chancellor Merkel gave a speech in the Bundestag last week or 10 days ago, where she, for the first time, openly spoke about that Germany will have to show solidarity. And when she talks about solidarity, she doesn't only mean kind words. She's talking about massive financial support. What we've seen in the last weeks were that the Mediterranean countries were arguing in favor of the so-called corona bonds, the mutualization of debts, which is very unpopular in Northern Europe, as you can imagine. So we have the Mediterraneans on the one hand and the frugal four, Austria, Netherlands, Finland, and perhaps the Baltics, who are on the other, in the other camp. And Germany and France in the end found a compromise that the concept of corona bonds is taking us nowhere. This is just not acceptable. Or as I once said to a British journalist, Germans love James Bond. They love James Bonds, all the ones we've had, but they don't approve corona bonds. That's something completely different. So this is highly unpopular, and always bear in mind that the Alternative für Deutschland, the nasty German version of UKIP, they're just waiting for this kind of issue to pop up. And this is extremely unpopular. So corona bonds is taking us nowhere. The instrument for this future solidarity, what we're discussing now in Brussels, is the so-called economic recovery plan for the Mediterranean. I think it will be embedded in the multi-annual financial framework for 2021 till 2027. And we are not talking, I think that the whole MFF concept will have to be rewritten, because all the wonderful things we had in our MFF are now, will now have to be adopted to the enormous new challenge we're facing. So, short answer, talked far too long. The MFF is the instrument. In the MFF, there will be some kind of economic recovery plan for the South, but the details, if it will be grants or loans, that hasn't been agreed yet. This will take at least another 2 or 3 weeks, and Ursula von der Leyen is in the moment having a hell of a job trying to coordinate this with 27 member states with very, very different interests.
Thank you, David, very much for that. Can I then turn to the next question from Alistair Burt? Are trade talks with anyone else, e.g. the US, really a threat as the UK media like to portray, a way of ensuring the United Kingdom gets what it wants out of the talks with the EU? Or is the threat just another part of the wearing rhetoric we must endure here? How do you view it from Brussels?
To be very, very clear, I think really more or less all interlocutors in Brussels and also in the member states, at least I can speak from my own home country, Germany, as much as we deeply regret the EU leaving, the UK leaving the EU, we want to have a good neighbourly partnership. And we want to get this done. Let me add, despite some disturbing rhetoric coming from the UK over all these years, Angela Merkel once said in the Bundestag, whatever the British media write, whatever some of the British politicians say, there's no need to be nasty, there's no need to take any kind of revenge, there's no need to retaliate. So we really want to get this done, and that's why we're well prepared. And if we ask, no, we don't ask, but if we argue that the UK government may consider rethinking if it's a 100% wise idea to already leave the single market and the customs union at the end of this year, this has nothing to do with putting any kind of pressure on the UK. We just believe, let's have a bit more time to get this done. Let's wait one more year. Nobody could have expected this pandemic. And if the Prime Minister has to ask for an extension, he can always blame this on the coronavirus. This has nothing to do with us. It's just so sad. Well, we've taken note of the beginning of the trade negotiations between the UK and the United States, and we wish our British friends all the best and good luck. We tried to negotiate a deal with the Americans. TTIP was extremely difficult in some issues for us, and we were speaking for a single market with 500 million consumers. It will be interesting to see if the UK, with 70 million consumers, gets a better deal than that what was offered to us 2 or 3 years ago. By the way, we should have got TTIP done under the Obama administration. I don't think as long as we have this president in office that we will be able to get any kind of a trade deal done. So we wish for our British friends good luck. But this certainly isn't a threat. We're actually going to be quite curious to follow how far you get.
Thank you. Now, the next question is about our EU's relations with China. And in fact, half of it came from Alistair, but I've run it together with Dirk Hazel. Alistair wanted to know what's the EU going to do about China and whether we support the admission of Taiwan to the WHO. The EU would do that. And Dirk Hazel wanted to know how far should the EU orient its economy away from the golden era relationship some had anticipated with the PRC. As you'll have noted, David, the view of China has nosedived in this country in the course of the last 5 weeks. I have to say that I personally had always been extremely sceptical about relations with China for rather longer.
Well, first of all, a special welcome to Dirk Hazel, who I still know from the EPP work. On China, well, I think the debate you're having in the UK is mirrored in many EU member states. The EU-China relations were supposed to be one of the priorities of the German EU presidency in the second half of this year. There was a plan to host for the first time an EU-China summit in Leipzig, I think in September. Why an EU-China summit? Because we wanted to make clear to the Chinese, if they want to negotiate with the EU, it's about negotiating with the EU 27, and not what they've done in recent years to have these formats 11 plus 1 or 16 plus 1, when they divided Europe between the East and West, and then for obvious reasons also took Greece and the Western Balkan countries, apart from Kosovo, on board. So this was supposed to be a priority. I'm not sure if the EU-China summit will now take place, or it might take place as a video conference, I don't know. But I also see the relations with China more critical than perhaps a few weeks ago. Josep Borrell, the new High Representative, said just these days in an interview that the Europeans might have been quite naive dealing with China, always looking at the economic opportunities that are there, but having difficulties to understand that China is a real geostrategic rival, a systemic rival. And I always have difficulties if the European Union call China a partner, because I don't want to name China in the same row with other countries who are real partners, including the United Kingdom or the United States. So very similar critical engagement. And on Taiwan, we adopted a resolution in the European Parliament at the beginning of the pandemic. I think the title was A Global Response to a Global Pandemic. And we, with a majority, supported Taiwan's membership of the World Health Organization. What really worries me is speaking to German and EU diplomats in international organizations. The more the Americans leave international organizations, the less American engagement we have. For instance, in the United Nations and in other organizations, immediately the Chinese are there to fill the gap. So if we want to counter Chinese influence, disinformation, and others, we need the Americans at our side. So the answer cannot be that the Americans say no to a multilateral world order. The Americans should go back to the multilateral structures we have and form alliances with like-minded partners, including the EU, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, or the United Kingdom.
Thank you, David. The next one is from Richard Inglewood, also probably known to you. Do you anticipate the EU being sympathetic towards the idea of the United Kingdom continuing to export significant quantities of goods into the single market, which currently fall within the scope of the CAP?
Well, as the EU has said, we're offering the United Kingdom an unprecedented cooperation with the single market. We have EU member states, as you know, who are not in the EU but in the single market, like Norway or Iceland. The UK will get the best offer, as Michel Barnier has pointed out so many times. It's about a tariff-free, a quota-free access to the world's largest single market. But of course, and this is for some in London the not so good news, this comes at a price, and the price will of course be the level playing field. Let's put it, what did Michel Barnier say? As an EU, we want to be ambitious in guaranteeing high social and environmental standards. We must be equally ambitious in preventing unfair trade distortions and unjustified competitive advantages, for instance, on state aid and relevant tax measures. So that is, in the end, I think, like we in the end couldn't hear certain buzzwords in the Brexit, the final phase of the Brexit debate. I'm very sure that the level playing field will be one of these words which every German will be able to spell. Was already, this really indicates where we are. So the free trade agreement proposed by the EU includes zero tariffs and zero quotas on all products, and would mean unprecedented access for the UK as a third country to our single market. But it's up to you to decide if you want to accept our conditions or not.
Oops.
Dominic, I can't hear you.
You can now hear me. Sorry, failure. I apologise. This is the technology I'm getting used to, but not actually chairing one of these meetings is rather more difficult. Daniel Patterson has got a question, which I must say I'd be interested for your view as well, which is in your explanation, you raised the concern that there now seems to be at an EU level. I have to say it's a concern which is probably shared by most of the people listening to this meeting, that the UK might be potentially reneging on the Northern Ireland Protocol or willing to do so. What impact would that have if that's the view that Brussels takes, is happening?
Well, the agreements on the Northern Ireland Protocol have been mutually agreed, and they are a fundamental condition for any future agreement. This is a special construction we've accepted, that the UK leaves the customs union, leaves the single market, but Northern Ireland will be left with a special status. But this requires, so we can preserve the integrity of our single market, this requires that the UK fulfills the obligations. There will have to be some kind of controls between Britain on the one hand and Northern Ireland on the other hand. How the Brits organise this is up to them, but there will have to be some kind of oversight by the EU, because we really depend that the integrity of the single market is defended. So this is not only an issue for the island of Ireland, but if a product once enters Northern Ireland, then it will benefit of the free movement of goods within the EU. So we need the phytosanitary checks and other checks for living animals, and we also need some kind of customs controls. And that's why these remarks coming from some UK ministers, there won't be controls in the Irish Sea. And that is a big concern for us in Brussels, because it's an integral part of what we have agreed. And of course, if these kind of comments are made, and every single interview of a UK minister in the British media is followed very closely by our EU representation in London and by the officials in Brussels, if we hear these kind of messages, of course, those critics in Brussels who said, oh, we've gone far too far with the British, they're not playing fair, they're going to trick us, they then get some good arguments. I mean, it's not like this that everyone in Brussels is as emotionally pro-British as the guest speaker you've invited today. Perhaps one final point, and I know that self-praise is absolutely no recommendation. It was a tactical move by the EPP to make me the chairman of the new UK Coordination Group and to end the engagement of Guy Verhofstadt. And there was one reason. Guy Verhofstadt considered him being a player in British domestic politics. And this is something which I am not doing. I don't want to get dragged into British political debates. It's up to you in your country and your parliament to decide which direction you want to go. I'm just, I can't say honest broker, but I'm just one of these people here in Brussels who want to really get the best deal done. And what I never do is, I try to avoid, is to attack the UK government, because despite the UK Conservatives having left the family of the EPP, we can still consider you being our, how can I say, cousins. And some are very close cousins and some are rather distant cousins, but they're still part of the wider family.
Thank you. And that's certainly the view of members of this group. Indeed, we want, one of our aims is to reinforce relations with the EPP, freed from what I think was David Cameron's disastrous mistake in taking us out of it. Next question is from Tim Kirkhope.
Oh.
So I was presumably listening in. So he says, David, although I hope there will be an extended period for the current negotiations between the EU and the UK, if that doesn't occur, candidly, what are your views on the future relationship between us both in the short and longer term?
Well, first of all, it's great that Timothy is with us, and we had a great 2 years together in the European Parliament. And Timothy, I do miss our Conservative colleagues, at least most of them. After you left, the colleague I was probably closest to was Geoffrey van Orden, and I was honoured to be invited to his farewell dinner in Brussels City Centre. Now, your question, well, after the last round, Michel Barnier didn't only use very sceptical words in the UK Coordination Group, which is an internal round, he said exactly the same at the press conference. So this really shows that he is concerned. And as I mentioned, June will be decisive. Both sides will have to be very clear at the end of June. Does it make sense to continue the negotiations or not? And will there be an extension or not? We are preparing for both alternatives, and we seriously have to now consider the option of the UK leaving without any kind of agreement at the end of this year. If both sides stick to the 31st of December and we don't make progress on major issues, then we'll have to come up with some kind of, I don't know, you've heard these terms before, managed, I can't say managed no deal, but managed exit of the single market and the customs union, that we can at least find agreements on those issues where we have common interests, where we agree, and the Germans would call it kind of Notfallgesetzgebung, emergency legislation, so the worst can be avoided. I am particularly concerned about the fate of 10,000s of young Europeans who would suffer, all those young students who are benefiting of the UK's excellent universities through the Erasmus Plus program. That is something which is a real concern for many, many families also in Germany, where we get a lot of requests. So then it would be some kind of managed, whatever kind of deal. But Michel Barnier and the Commission are sending out further emergency notices to the member states how to prepare for the plan B, as we call it here in Brussels. We can no longer expect that we will actually get a comprehensive agreement before the end of this year. And I just said at the beginning that we have less than 8 months left. Practically, we have 6 months left, because at a technical level, the negotiations will have to be concluded end of October, beginning of November latest, because then we will need the consent of the member states' governments and the European Parliament. One thing is clear: the European Union will try to negotiate an EU-only agreement in this year to avoid having to ask all the national parliaments for their approval. We all remember what happened to the Canadian deal, which was at the end stuck in the regional parliament of Wallonia.
Thank you. Question from Robert Morland. I'm conscious that it's a decade since the Lisbon Treaty. How satisfactory do you feel the development of the role of the Foreign Policy High Representative and the External Action Service has been? Given the United Kingdom has been at the front of foreign policy in the EU, do you think there's a need for a structure to ensure substantial cooperation between the EU and the UK on foreign policy issues?
Well, that's an excellent question. You may remember that the European Union initially offered the UK a cooperation based on 4 pillars: trade, internal security, police and justice issues, foreign policy, and other thematic cooperation, including science, education, whatever. The UK has refused to negotiate any kind of foreign affairs issues. They haven't even accepted to start a negotiating table. So in the moment, we're going nowhere on this field. We regret this in Brussels because we thought that cooperation on foreign affairs, security and defense could be a real added value for both sides. Our offer remains, but there's been absolutely no indication from the UK side that they see this as a priority. There are many ideas which were floating, how to keep the UK on board on foreign policy, how we can inform each other. There was an offer from the EU, if the UK is interested in participating in EU defense and security missions, you would be able to do so, of course not as a lead nation. There are ideas, if the UK was interested, how to integrate them in PESCO projects, for instance, military mobility or others, like we do the same with our NATO ally and partner Norway. So there's been a lot to offer, but there has absolutely been no positive response from the UK side. In general, now this is a very German perspective, which I guess a lot of people, even the conservative family, pro-European, are not used to. As a German Christian Democrat, I strongly believe in a closer coordination on foreign affairs. It's always been our policy that we are in favor of strengthening the role of the High Representative and Vice President. We were in favor of creating a European External Action Service, and we support Ursula von der Leyen's call that this new commission is supposed to be a geopolitical commission, and this includes establishing a fully fledged defense union in by 2025. Final remark. As much as we regret that the British have left the European Union, if there's one political field where we have made progress, and this might have to do with the British no longer vetoing any of our activities, then it's actually security and defense policy. Since 2016, we've made more progress in this field than in the 55 years before, including the military conduct capability, which is a headquarters, but we're not allowed to call headquarters, which includes the PESCO projects. We now have 47 PESCO projects which have been identified. And the third item is the European Defence Fund, where we are now actively, through EU budget money, promoting cross-border cooperation on defence procurement. I know that this was always very hot potato from the British side. I know that people aren't very enthusiastic about this, but sorry, if you invite a German Christian Democrat, don't be surprised if here are actually people who are in favor in the long run of the European Defence Union, but we always accepted that the British didn't want to participate. But it was always a bit sad that you sometimes vetoed any single initiative where we always said, look, nobody's forcing you to go these ways, but if Germans, Belgians, Luxembourgers, Italians and Spanish believe in this, why don't we get the opportunity? By the way, you have now left us in this field with the clear lead of the French.
Whoops. There we are. Sorry. Thank you. Yes, but the French, that I think is the great contrast between Germany and France. The French can't resist gloating with, because of our history of rivalry. There's always a gloat somewhere in the French approach to Britain, and I suspect vice versa as well. So I think it's a mutual. It's part of the mutual relationship. Can I then turn coming back to something you said, Mark Leverton has asked the question, which arises directly out of today's German Constitutional Court judgment, suggesting that part of the EBC's bond buying programme violates the German constitution. What implications do you see for the euro and the eurozone countries coming from this, or is it too early to say?
Actually, once this webinar is over, I'm going to have a closer look at the court ruling. In the moment, I only know what I read in the headlines and in the brief summary. Being a German lawyer myself, I've learned something. The German Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe, the Bundesverfassungsgericht, is the equivalent of the British monarch. You can criticize any institution in Germany in the political debate, but you better not criticize the German Constitutional Court. So I have to be very careful. And now, what I've read until now, I have to read the whole decision to understand what has happened here. There is obviously a big rivalry between the German Constitutional Court and the European Court of Justice. And the Bundesverfassungsgericht, now I have to be diplomatic, the members of the Bundesverfassungsgericht are rather self-confident, and they see them as not only being able to interpret German constitutional law, but also to put it in a European context. So what we've really seen here for the first time is that the German Constitutional Court is not accepting the interpretation of the European Court of Justice. And I've seen, for instance, Spanish colleagues of mine tweeting today, well, if the German Constitutional Court doesn't accept ECJ rulings, where's the difference to the behavior of the governments in Poland and Hungary? So this Constitutional Court decision has already provoked a debate in Europe, and this will continue the next few days. So I'm not in the position today to give you a detailed answer, but a few questions ago, I was arguing about the mutualization of debts, how unpopular this is, and that after this court decision today, every leader from a South European country, EU member state, asking Germany to go away in any form of mutualization of debts should always know that the German Bundesverfassungsgericht is very strict. And once again, they have shown. Now, I have, as the Germans say, two hearts in my chest. On the one hand, my fiscal conservative heart is happy what the Bundesverfassungsgericht decided today, but as a convinced European and somebody who believes that we need an authority which is accepted in all 27 member states, and that is the European Court of Justice, I have some doubts what the judges in Karlsruhe decided today, but I would never ever criticize the Bundesverfassungsgericht outside this webinar, and if anyone declares that I did so, I will say that it's the exact opposite. So you always have to accept the Bundesverfassungsgericht's decision. In my next life, I'll plan to become a member of the Bundesverfassungsgericht, because then you have the real power, not like the Bundestag.
Thank you. I think we've got time only for one more question, and I'm also conscious people have been sending stuff through on the chat, and I'm going to try to weave one or two strands together. And sorry to have to come back to this key issue about the UK, whether we get a deal and transition. You suggested that you thought there was nothing that should be done by the EU to give the impression they were trying to ask for an extension, because that would then make it harder for Boris Johnson to make a request based on the impact of coronavirus on the negotiations. Alan Meekings wonders whether in fact the EU Parliament if it were to vote to instruct the Commission to request an extension on the grounds of the global pandemic, but that might not help Boris Johnson ask for his extension. I don't know whether you have a view on that. The other thing which I think also lies at the root of quite a few of the questions that have come in, and I don't know if you can deal with it in a minute or two, is the UK seems to make the point, well, we want a Canada-style relationship. Why won't you give it to us why are you insisting on giving us all these extra strings because of our proximity? Do you see that as a fair criticism or not?
Well, the second question, I would suggest that you invite Michel Barnier to your next webinar. Michel Barnier has explained extensively why Canada is not the UK and why the UK isn't Canada. And his main argument is, of course, you're exactly at the doorstep of the single market. And we have heard these ideas of Singapore on the Thames and so on. So he really has made very clear, and he's speaking, of course, on behalf of 27 member states, that under no circumstances the UK and Canada can be treated equally. The second question on the extension of the transition period. I think twice called in the UK media, I think once in the Times and once in the Guardian, for the UK to extend the transition period. And I got a confidential call from somebody in the UK who means it, who's in good faith for both sides. And he said, David, please stop these kind of comments. They're not helpful. And you may mean well, but you're doing the exact opposite. So I served 2 years in the German military. If I get my orders, I say, jawohl, from now on, I will shut up. I follow the British media, so I know that the Scots are calling for the extension, the Northern Irish are calling for the extension, Labour's calling for an extension, reasonable people in British industry and business. I mean, everyone's calling for the extension, but it's probably best to keep it in the UK and the Prime Minister to come up with the idea. And I promise you that if the UK government comes up with this idea, and of course we know that the UK government will need the approval of the House of Commons, I promise you that we will all declare it was solely the decision of the UK Prime Minister, that we never said anything, that we never asked anything to do so, but if the UK insists on extending the transition period, we would, after long discussions, probably be ready. We can really sell this as a huge success for the UK government. I mean, we're really showing our will, but I have been told, not only by British officials, also by diplomats in Brussels, stop the activities calling for an extension of the transition period. We have made our point more than clear. Dominic, as somebody who has British roots, and I just love following British politics, and I was watching with my teenage daughters actually the old versions of Yes Minister and the House of Cards during the pandemic. That's good entertainment. But we really follow British politics, and we are so many, not only me, we're so full of respect for the oldest democracy in the world and your great parliament. But in recent years, even people like me, we have difficulties understanding some of the debates. I don't know why you can insist on leaving the single market and the customs union in this unprecedented time. The biggest challenge since the Second World War. For God's sake, 1 year more. Why is this such an issue for the people in the UK government? But we accept any decision. It takes two to tango. The ball is in the British court. And if Boris comes up last minute with this idea, I will cheer him even in the Guardian.
David, that's a wonderful note on which to end. And I can't thank you enough for having given your time, what is now 8:30 Brussels time, to spend with us. I know that all the dozens of people who are on this webinar are all very appreciative. We can't applaud because it's impossible. Well, I suppose I could applaud, but it's beyond that, you wouldn't hear the noise surrounding you. I would just like to thank, therefore, you. Alistair Burt says, thanks, David, really good. So there you are, and it's pouring in. So on the chat line.